Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Ollie Barrett, live from Riga in Latvia, and these are the headlines. The UK announces more sanctions against Russian entities and individuals, targeting those that it says push Vladimir Putin's fake news. New Delhi is today the centre of diplomacy on the Ukraine conflict. British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has arrived in India. Her visit clashes with the arrival of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addresses the Dutch Parliament and asks for more weapons, reconstruction aid and a halt to all business with Russia. Kiev sends dozens of buses to evacuate civilians from the besieged city of Mariupol after a Russian ceasefire announcement, as Ankara signals the foreign ministers of Russia and Ukraine could meet within 2 weeks. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan is to address the country tonight. This as the Pakistan National Assembly is set to debate a no-confidence motion against him. And Sri Lanka faces drawn-out power cuts as a deepening economic crisis hits markets. Its electricity regulator urges more than 1 million government employees to work from home and save fuel. And we'll start in India, where the British Foreign Minister is to rally support against Russia. The Foreign Secretary is holding a meeting with India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar on regional and global issues of mutual interest. After the meeting, Liz Truss will also participate in an inaugural edition of the India-UK Strategic Futures Forum, hosted by the India Council of World Affairs and Policy Exchange. The British High Commissioner to India has suggested that the talks will include the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and the United Kingdom aims to rally India's support against the Kremlin. Liz Truss's trip coincides with that of her Russian opposite number, though, Sergei Lavrov. He's also arrived in India for a separate meeting tomorrow. The pair are not expected to cross paths in New Delhi. Sergei Lavrov will use his visit to push for closer trade links with India, as Russia looks to help reduce the impact of economic sanctions imposed by the West following its invasion of Ukraine. India has so far steered away from taking sides on the ongoing Ukrainian crisis. New Delhi has been called somewhat shaky by US President Joe Biden for not picking a side, but India says it's been working for diplomacy over aggression. The German Foreign and Security Policy Advisor to the country's Chancellor has also been in New Delhi.
Friendly country to the Republic of Serbia and Serbian people.
I think the situation in which India is. You live in a complicated neighborhood. You have challenges of constraints of your own, and one of the aims of my discussions here in Delhi today is to better understand how this geopolitical specificity of India plays into your analysis of what is going on in Ukraine. And
India has been hosting back-to-back high-level diplomatic visits and meetings. From China to Europe, foreign ministers have been lining up in New Delhi recently to talk over differences. Our correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, joins me live now from New Delhi. Siddhant, talk to me first about Liz Truss's talks in India. Is she expected to make any progress when it comes to urging India to take a tougher stance against Russia?
Well, Delhi is a busy capital, and her visit is part of a slew of visits New Delhi has seen. We know that there have been visits by foreign ministers from China, Oman, Greece, Austria, and of course the Russian foreign minister lands in a few hours' time. But her visit is part of a wider diplomatic push by UK when it comes to India's position. But it does not look like that India is going to change its position. While India has said that when it comes to sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries, this is something that is of concern, and this has been New Delhi's policy when it comes to, for historical reason, something that India has reiterated. But when it comes to its position at the United Nations, we will see if there is any kind of vote. As of now, there is no vote, abstention from New Delhi. But India is an important partner for Britain in a post-Brexit world, especially when it comes to trade. We know that trade talks are happening between both sides. There have been multiple rounds of negotiations, and of course Indo-Pacific. We know UK's tilt towards Indo-Pacific is something that London has been talking about.
And Siddhant, let's talk then about Sergei Lavrov. He perhaps has an advantage in one sense that he comes after Liz Truss for his talks. What does Sergei Lavrov want from this visit to India?
Well, Sergei Lavrov and Liz Truss visit, there will be presence of both the ministers at the same time for few hours, but they will be present in the city together. Of course, there is no meeting as of now, and it will not be possible, at least given the situation in Eastern Europe, the invasion of the Russians. But if we talk about the key focus, if we look from New Delhi's point of view, Russia is an important ally, a partner, a key partner when it comes to defense. And this is a visit where the Russian side is expected to talk about their perspective, what they think about the entire situation that has developed. They have been lauding New Delhi's support with the abstentions at the United Nations. And also remember that this development is happening at a time when the delivery of crucial S-400s have been started by Moscow to New Delhi. The first of the units reached India in the month of December. And this year, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to travel to Russia for the annual India-Russia summit. Also, the BRICS meeting in China. So we have seen visits by the Chinese, who are, of course, the chair of the BRICS. So whether it's BRICS, defense, or the bilateral relationship, these all things will be the key focus areas. But of course, above all, it is the crisis in Ukraine, the Russian invasion, in which Moscow is expected to talk about what they think about the situation and how they think that the situation is going to pan out in next few months and weeks.
Okay, Siddhant, thank you. That's Siddhant Sibal joining me live from New Delhi. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is warning that Russian troops are regrouping in preparation for a renewed assault in the east of the country. He's dismissing Moscow's promises of scaling back attacks on Kyiv and Chernihiv.
Є також інші слова, які звучать про нібито відведення російських військ від Києва і Чернігова, про нібито зниження активності окупантів на цих напрямках. Ми знаємо, що це не відведення, а наслідки вигнання, наслідки роботи наших захисників. Але також бачимо, що у цей же час відбувається накопичування російських військ для нових ударів на Донбасі.
Russia's Ministry of Defense claims this was the plan all along. Military officials say the main aim was to tie up Ukrainian forces so that they couldn't be used against Russian troops in the Donbas region in the east. Western analysts now believe that Russia will focus on capturing territory in the east and the south of Ukraine, which it may feel will then strengthen its hand at the negotiating table. Negotiations are expected to resume online on Friday, though neither side are expecting any resolutions, and Russia has not yet confirmed it will even take part in those discussions. US intelligence suggests the Russian president has been, quote, misled by his ministers. American and European officials suggest that Vladimir Putin's relations with his own staff have deteriorated and that they are too scared to tell him the truth.
Russian President Vladimir Putin was misled by advisors who were too scared to tell him how poorly the war in Ukraine is going and how damaging Western sanctions have been, White House and European officials said on Wednesday. Russia's invasion of its neighbor has encountered stiff resistance from Ukrainian forces who have recaptured territory, even as civilians are trapped in besieged cities. White House Communications Director Kate Bedingfield.
We have information that Putin felt misled by the Russian military, which has resulted in persistent tension between Putin and his military leadership. We believe that Putin is being misinformed by his advisors about how badly the Russian military is performing and how the Russian economy is being crippled by sanctions because his senior advisors are too afraid to tell him the truth.
The Kremlin made no immediate response, and the Russian embassy in Washington did not immediately reply to a request for comment. Washington's decision to share its intelligence more publicly reflects a strategy it has pursued since before the war began. One senior European diplomat said the U.S. assessment was in line with European thinking, that Putin thought things were going better than they were. That diplomat also said there were no indications for now that the situation could foster a revolt among the Russian military, but he called the situation unpredictable. Military analysts say Russia has reframed its war goals in Ukraine in a way that may make it easier for Putin to claim a face-saving victory, despite a military campaign that has suffered humiliating setbacks. Russian forces bombarded the outskirts of the capital Kiev and the besieged city of Chernihiv in northern Ukraine on Wednesday, a day after Russia promised to scale down military operations in both cities, in what the West dismissed as a ploy to regroup by invaders suffering heavy losses.
Russian state TV is the main source of news for millions of Russians, so many of them believe the Kremlin's claim that Russia was forced to act in Ukraine to defend Russian speakers against what it calls genocide. But the citizens living outside Russia, many of those are trying to send other accounts of the Ukrainian war to their relatives back home.
The story that she believes is that Russia is the savior for the Slavic world.
This is Andrei Nokrin. From his home in Seattle, via WhatsApp, he recently sent his mother in Moscow a clip that went viral in the West of a television editor interrupting a live Russian state-run news bulletin to protest the Ukraine invasion.
I've done it to try to help her to see the other side and to just maybe have her own thoughts on the events that are happening, not just the propaganda she might be getting from the TV.
But his mother said the protest looked fake, as if it had been staged with a green screen. It is an example of how Russian Americans are sending their relatives in the homeland accounts of the war in Ukraine, trying to counter the misinformation coming from Russian state media. But it's an uphill battle. Reuters interviews with 11 Russian Americans suggest that, as with the case of Nokrin's mother, support for Russia and belief that it's doing the right thing runs deep.
That Putin's special military operation is helping the Russians to fight off Ukrainian nationalists that are a threat to the Russian population there. So she really thinks they are on a mission to help.
State TV, the main source of news for many millions of Russians, closely follows the Kremlin line that Russia was forced to act in Ukraine to demilitarize and denazify the country.
Definitely sure that she's getting her information from the state-run TV. That television forms her opinion that television forms the explanation of what is happening in the world.
Nokrin has sent his relatives pictures of injured Ukrainian children, dead Russian soldiers, and bombed-out apartment buildings and hospitals.
Mostly it's been lack of response or ignoring, answering or changing the topic. But from my conversation with her, or even some messages, she has a different opinion.
Russian state TV did not respond to a Reuters request for comment. The Kremlin declined to comment. Russia cracked down on the press last month, passing a law that bans what it calls the, quote, public dissemination of deliberately false information, making dissent in Russia even more dangerous. Offenders face up to 15 years in jail. Leaving it up to Russians abroad like Andrei Nokrin to try to give relatives a real picture of Russia's war raging next door and the suffering it's caused.
As the holy month of Ramzan is set to start this week, Saudi Arabia and Yemen's Houthi rebels have announced a unilateral ceasefire. It's seen as a significant step in achieving peace and ending the 7 years of war. The United Nations and the US have welcomed the announcements.
United Nations and United States envoys have welcomed unilateral truces called by both of Yemen's warring sides. The Saudi-led coalition said it would temporarily halt military operations from Wednesday. That was after the Iran-aligned Houthis declared a 3-day cessation of cross-border attacks and ground offensives. It's the most significant step in peace efforts for more than 3 years. 7 years of war have killed tens of thousands in Yemen and pushed millions into hunger. The UN had called for a truce during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which starts this week. The UN and US envoys stressed the need for a more comprehensive ceasefire, speaking at talks hosted by Saudi Arabia of allied factions. The Houthis say they will only attend talks if they are held in a neutral country. This was the UN's special envoy to Yemen, Hans Grundberg, in Riyadh on Wednesday.
I have been encouraged by the enthusiastic participation of Yemeni political parties, components, experts and civil society representatives in this process. Across the plurality of voices, a common message has emerged. Yemenis want the war to end, and they want a just and durable peace.
US Special Envoy Tim Lenderking told the gathering in Riyadh that the unilateral announcements were a step in the right direction. The two envoys have been pressing Riyadh to ease coalition sea and air restrictions on areas held by the Houthis, who ousted the Saudi-backed government from the capital Sana'a in late 2014, prompting the coalition to intervene months later. They have also urged the Houthis to end an offensive in energy-producing Marib, the internationally recognised government's last stronghold in North Yemen. A permanent ceasefire has proved elusive, with both sides resisting compromise. The conflict is largely seen as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un appeared in a video last week said to be taken during the launch of the country's latest intercontinental ballistic missile. But now South Korea is raising doubts over the authenticity of those North Korean claims. Seoul says the missile test used an older and smaller ICBM Hwasong-15 and not the new Hwasong-17 as claimed by Pyongyang. According to experts, the parameters of the missile launch were strikingly similar to a missile test of 2017 when North Korea launched the Hwasong-15. However, the latest launch flew for a longer time and at a lower altitude with an increased range of 950 kilometers. The US has still not yet publicly weighed in on the South Korean analysis and is thought to be still analysing the North Korean test itself. Washington earlier said that the tests involved the new system and that North Korea was likely to move to a full-range launch.
기술적으로 실천적으로 담보할 수 있다는 것이 명백히 증명됐습니다. 시험 발사는 대성공으로 평가됐습니다.
The World Health Organization has released an updated plan to deal with COVID-19. The global health body has laid out 3 possible scenarios for how the pandemic is likely to evolve this year. And while the virus does evolve, its severity, it says, may reduce. The updated Strategic Preparedness, Readiness and Response Plan details strategic adjustments that every country, it says, needs to make. The goal is to combat the drivers of COVID transmission, to lessen the impact of the virus and end the global health emergency.
Today, WHO is releasing our updated Strategic Preparedness, Readiness and Response Plan for COVID-19. This is our third strategic plan for COVID-19, and it could end, should be our last. It lays out three possible scenarios for how the pandemic could evolve this year. Based on what we know now, the most likely scenario is that the virus continues to evolve, but the severity of disease it causes reduces over time as immunity increases due to vaccination and infection.
Dr. Tedros says there will be a periodic spike in cases and that deaths may climb as well as global immunity decreases. He says vulnerable sections of the population may well require periodic boosting against COVID-19. South Korea has largely scrapped its aggressive tracing and containment efforts for COVID-19, despite recording record numbers of cases. It's joined a growing list of Asian countries that have eased quarantine rules as well, and so hundreds of South Koreans have started travel bookings again after spending 2 years being socially distanced.
Armed with a suitcase in one hand and boarding passes in another, Kim Ho-jun and his wife are more than ready for their first real holiday in more than 2 years. As they take off for Honolulu, they're joining a rush of South Koreans out for so-called revenge travel, giving into cravings for travel after lockdowns.
I love travelling, but I've been very stressed because I couldn't go on a trip and didn't know when I would be able to go abroad again. I've waited a long time for this.
It all began weeks ago when mandatory quarantine was scrapped for fully vaccinated travelers from most countries. Now there's a scramble to book trips abroad that had been delayed by restrictions. There was a brief moment last year where it was all lifted before limits came again in December. However, unlike last year, people now seem more eager to travel. Recent polls show people are less worried about catching the virus and increasingly see its prevention as out of their hands. A South Korean shopping channel, CJ OnStyle, said that in 1 hour on Sunday, it got some 2,800 orders for a Spain and Italy trip, amounting to more than $12 million. That comes just days after a more than $7 million sale for packages to Hawaii.
In the case of last year's travel packages, which were made valid for 2 years, it was like we were selling expectations to customers, like dreams and hopes rather than actual travel package plans. But this time, with the exemption of quarantine for overseas arrivals, it's become possible to travel.
Kim and his wife booked their tickets to Hawaii last minute. It's where they enjoyed their honeymoon 6 years ago. They're eager, both to relive pre-2020 life and to put the memories of lockdowns behind. The one thing left to do is board their flight.
Badminton in the dark. Sounds like a racket to me, but Malaysia is offering an experience where people can play the sport in a space-like environment. We'll leave you with that story. Do join me again tomorrow, live from Riga. In the meantime, stay tuned to WION.
It's completely dark, of course, but with the lightning, somehow we are still able to hit it, and then it requires better focus, and it's exciting. Yeah, it's different, but it's still playing like normal.
First is the speed, because when we look at the shutter, right, the light come to us, then already that means too fast for us.
There are many other. This is right, Arab.
One world